The midday sun beat down on the dusty yard, bleaching the wooden fences to pale splinters and turning the air into waves of shimmering heat. People gathered in a restless knot near the corral, their voices carrying the same tone they used when buying cattle, mules, or broken-down wagons. But today, the auction block wasn't holding livestock, it held men. Prisoners. Drifters who'd run afoul of the law. A few heads hung low in shame, others stared straight ahead with cold defiance. Cassidy Reeves stood at the edge of the crowd, the brim of her hat shadowing her eyes. She had no business being here, her ranch was barely holding together after the drought, and she could barely afford feed for her horses. But the notice had said laborers were being auctioned cheap, and she needed help before winter came. She told herself that was the only reason she'd come. Still, a knot twisted in her gut as the auctioneer's voice cracked over the heat. One by one, the men were paraded across the platform, ranch hands caught stealing, gamblers too deep in debt, even a half-wild tracker nobody would bid on. Cassidy kept her arms folded, careful not to look too interested. Then the last man stepped up, and the air changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hands cuffed in front of him. A shadow of stubble covered his jaw, and his dark hair was tied back at the nape of his neck. But it was his eyes, pale, unreadable, that made the crowd go quiet. The auctioneer's tone shifted, trying to sound casual but not quite hiding the tension. Next up, we got ourselves a hard worker. Strong as an ox. Name's Colton Wade. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cassidy had heard that name before, though not from anyone who spoke it willingly. There were stories, about a saloon brawl in Deadwood that left 3 men in the ground, about a cattle drive that ended with every boss dead but him. No proof, just whispers. Nobody raised a hand. The auctioneer's smile faltered. All right now, who's gonna start me at $20? Silence. Even the dust seemed to hang in the air. Cassidy glanced toward the saloon owner, the blacksmith, the old ranchers, not one of them would meet her eyes. Colton's gaze drifted over the crowd and landed on her. It wasn't a plea or a challenge, just a look that pinned her in place. She didn't mean to lift her hand. It just happened. 10, she said, her voice carrying further than she intended. A ripple of disbelief went through the bystanders. The auctioneer hesitated, then banged his gavel with a shrug. Sold. To the lady in the brown hat. Cassidy felt the weight of every stare as Colton was led off the block and the iron key turned in his cuffs. He didn't smile or thank her. He just stepped down and fell into pace beside her as she walked toward the hitching post where her horse waited. They didn't speak until they were halfway down the road out of town. That was when she saw it, the edge of a tattoo curling up from under his sleeve as he adjusted the rope holding his small sack of belongings. It was a snake, coiled around a dagger, inked in dark, deliberate strokes. But it wasn't just the tattoo that made her blood run cold, it was the brand burned into the skin just above it, a faint but unmistakable mark shaped like a half-moon. Every rancher, drifter, and lawman in the West knew that mark. It was worn only by members of the Black Vultures, a gang that didn't just rob, but hunted. Cassidy's grip tightened on the reins. She'd bought herself help for the ranch, but she'd also bought the kind of trouble that could bury her 6 feet under before the month was out. The road home stretched long and lonely, cutting through dry grass and low hills that shimmered in the late afternoon heat. Cassidy kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight, the rhythmic clop of her horse's hooves doing little to quiet the storm in her thoughts. Colton Wade walked beside her mount with a steady, unhurried stride, his hands now free but still hanging loose at his sides like they were ready for anything. He didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going, he just followed, as if he already knew the way. When the ranch came into view, a weathered barn, a sagging porch, a handful of thin cattle grazing, Colton's gaze flicked over it once, and then he looked at her. "You run this place alone." His voice was low, gravelly, the kind that carried more weight than volume. "I manage," she said, dismounting and tying off her horse. She didn't offer him a tour or a welcome. Instead, she tossed him a set of worn gloves. "If you're gonna earn your keep, there's fence line needs fixing and water troughs that need filling." He caught the gloves without looking at them. "And if I don't feel like earning my keep?" The question wasn't mocking, but it carried a quiet danger. Cassidy stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "Then you can keep walking. The road's long, the nights get cold, and I doubt the law's done with you yet." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Colton slipped the gloves on and turned toward the barn without another word. By nightfall, the fence line was mended, the troughs brimming, and a pile of chopped wood stacked by the porch. Cassidy watched from the doorway as Colton wiped the sweat from his brow. He worked with a precision that was almost unsettling, no wasted movement, no hesitation, every swing of the axe deliberate. But what unsettled her more was the way he moved when he thought she wasn't looking, scanning the tree line, glancing toward the road, like a man who expected trouble to arrive any second. Over supper, beans, bread, and strong coffee, she caught him watching her hands as she poured his cup. "You knew what that mark on my arm meant," he said finally, not as a question but as a statement. Cassidy didn't answer right away. "I've heard the stories," she admitted. "The black vultures. People say they're ghosts in the desert. Show up when they want, leave nothing but bones behind." Colton leaned back in his chair, his pale eyes fixed on her. "People say a lot of things. Doesn't make all of it true." She wanted to believe him, but that brand wasn't something a man stumbled into by accident. "Then tell me," she said, "what's true?" Colton didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his coffee and drank in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. That silence spoke louder than any confession. The next morning, she found him already awake, tending to the horses. The animals seemed wary of him at first, their ears twitching, but within minutes they were calm, their movements easy under his hands. "You've worked with stock before," she said, leaning against the fence. "I've worked with a lot of things," he replied without looking up. She caught the edge in his tone and decided not to press further. By midday, a rider appeared on the horizon, a deputy from town, dust clinging to his coat. He pulled up at the gate, tipping his hat. "Cassidy, heard you took on some help from the auction. Just came to let you know, one of them fellas, Colton Wade, ain't exactly a man you want near your place." His eyes slid toward the barn where Colton stood in the shadows. "Word is, the rest of his gang's been seen riding this way." Cassidy felt her stomach drop. She'd known trouble might follow him, but she hadn't expected it so soon. The deputy lowered his voice. "If I were you, I'd send him packing before dark. Once the vultures come, they don't knock." Then he spurred his horse and rode off, leaving the warning hanging in the hot, still air. When she turned back toward the barn, Colton was gone from sight. A moment later, his voice came from behind her, low and quiet. "You gonna take his advice?" She spun, finding him closer than she'd realized, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, she considered it, telling him to go, locking the gates, hoping trouble would pass her by. But then she remembered the way the crowd had looked at him at the auction, like he was already condemned, and how he'd worked without complaint when given the choice to walk away. "I don't scare easy," she said finally. Colton studied her for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Good, you're gonna need that." That night, the wind came in restless bursts, rattling the loose shutters and sending the barn doors creaking on their hinges. Cassidy lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the deputy's warning replaying in her mind. She told herself she'd made her choice, to keep Colton on, but now the weight of that choice pressed heavy against her chest. Somewhere outside, a horse snorted, followed by the low, steady crunch of boots in dirt. She slipped from bed, grabbed the lantern, and stepped to the window. On the ridge beyond the pasture, the moonlight caught them, 5 riders, black coats billowing like shadows given form. They sat their horses in a line, unmoving, watching the ranch. Even from this distance, Cassidy could feel the wrongness in the air, the way the land itself seemed to grow still beneath their gaze. One of the riders lifted a gloved hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Then they turned and melted into the darkness. By morning, Colton was already saddling a horse. "They're here," he said before she could open her mouth. "They're testing the ground. Next time, it won't just be a look." Cassidy folded her arms. "Then tell me why they want you so bad. And don't give me silence again." He hesitated, then pulled back his sleeve, exposing the tattoo fully. The coiled snake around the dagger was ink deep, each scale shaded like it might slither from his skin. Above it, the half-moon brand was angry and puckered, as if it had been burned into him not once, but twice. "I wasn't just part of the vultures," he said finally. "I led them, every raid, every ambush, every bloody trail they left, my name was at the front. Until I walked away." Cassidy's voice was sharp. "You walked away from men like that? Nobody walks away." Colton's eyes darkened. "I did, and they've been hunting me ever since, because men like Samuel Black don't forgive betrayal. Not when it comes from their own." Her breath caught. Samuel Black, the name was more a curse than a man, whispered in saloons and jails alike. The leader of the vultures, a man who could order a killing with the same ease as ordering a drink. So they'll kill you, she said, and anyone standing next to you. Colton didn't deny it. That's why I told you to send me off. Cassidy thought of the ranch, of the empty fields she was trying to keep alive, of her parents who had built it plank by plank. She thought of the quiet nights before Colton's shadow fell across her life. But she also thought of the crowd at the auction, of how no one had dared move or speak when his name was called, and how he'd fixed fences and fed her stock without complaint, knowing every minute he stayed made him a target. By midday, the vultures came. Dust rolled over the horizon like smoke before a fire, the glint of gunmetal catching the sun. There were more than before, 8 riders this time, Samuel Black at their center, a wolf among wolves. His face was lean, his smile all teeth. They didn't slow until they reached the gate, and when they stopped, the silence felt like a noose tightening. Colton Wade, Samuel called, his voice smooth as oil. I'm almost flattered you've made me ride this far. Colton stepped forward, rifle in hand, his stance easy but eyes locked on Samuel. You rode for nothing. I told you, I'm done. Samuel chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. Done? You're never done, brother. You just forgot where you belong. And you know what happens to men who forget. Cassidy stood on the porch, the shotgun heavy in her hands, her pulse loud in her ears. She could see the flicker of surprise in Samuel's eyes when he noticed her, but it was gone in an instant. You protecting him, miss? Samuel asked. That's sweet. It's also gonna get you killed. The first shot broke the standoff, not from Colton, not from Samuel, but from one of the riders in the back. Wood splintered near Cassidy's head, and then the yard exploded into gunfire. Colton moved like a man born to battle, dropping 2 riders before they cleared the gate. Cassidy fired from the porch, the recoil bruising her shoulder, but she kept shooting, the sound of the blasts ringing in her skull. When the smoke began to clear, 3 riders lay in the dirt, 2 more limped away wounded, and Samuel himself sat on his horse, still smiling but with rage simmering beneath it. This isn't over, Colton, he called. You can't hide forever, and when I come back, I'm not leaving anything standing. He turned his horse, his men following like shadows, until the dust swallowed them whole. Cassidy lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling. Colton stepped up onto the porch, a shallow cut bleeding at his temple. You still think I should go? He asked. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. No, if they're coming back, we face them together.